Des Moines, Iowa, summer of 1985. A sprawling canvas of green, where endless fields of corn whispered secrets to the relentless August breeze. The air hung heavy and humid, a tangible presence that clung to your skin, promising the annual spectacle of the Iowa State Fair, a beacon of vibrant chaos, a momentary escape from the quiet rhythms of heartland life. For the Millers, nestled in their modest two-story home, this wasn't merely another summer. It was the season their youngest, Kevin, blossomed into 12. Kevin Miller was the embodiment of a mid-80s Des Moines kid. His face was a constellation of freckles, his knees perpetually scuffed from adventurous tumbles, and his infectious laugh was a familiar melody echoing down their tree-lined street in the Beaverdale neighborhood. His universe revolved around the gleam of his red BMX bike, a blur of motion as he explored the wilder dirt paths along the Raccoon River, or, in quieter moments, meticulously choreographed epic Star Wars battles with his action figures across the worn carpet of his bedroom. Sarah, his mother, a woman with a quick smile and a keen eye for fashion, who worked part-time at the Yonkers department store downtown, often found him deeply engrossed in tales of adventure, Hardy Boys mysteries, Twain's River sagas, or the latest young adult sci-fi. David, his father, a man of quiet strength and unwavering dedication at the John Deere plant, instilled in Kevin the art of casting a perfect line into the tranquil waters of Saylorville Lake and patiently demystified the rumbling mechanics of his beloved '76 Ford pickup. They were a quintessential American family, their lives interwoven with the fabric of their community, their days marked by shared meals, Sunday church, and the comforting predictability of the changing Iowa seasons. Their roots ran deep, nurtured by the values of hard work, neighborliness, and an abiding sense of place. The Iowa State Fair, a venerable tradition dating back to the mid-19th century, was the undisputed crescendo of their summer. It transformed the eastern edge of Des Moines into a temporary city of sensory overload, a riot of kaleidoscopic lights, a symphony of competing sounds, and an intoxicating cocktail of aromas. The sweet, sticky allure of funnel cake, the savory char of roasted corn, the earthy scent of livestock, all mingling under the vast, scorching August sky. A cacophony of carnival barkers hawking their wares, the twang of country music from distant stages, and the exhilarating screams from the sky glider and the grandstand filled the air. For Kevin, it was a yearly pilgrimage to a realm of pure, unadulterated magic. For weeks leading up to the event, he'd pored over the official fair program, his pencil tracing paths to his essential destinations. The majestic, sculpted butter cow in the Ag Building, the surprisingly competitive pig races, and of course the heart-stopping array of carnival rides. The Zipper, a whirling metal beast, the dizzying tilt-a-whirl. The centrifugal force of the Gravitron, each promised a new frontier of adrenaline-fueled delight. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a tangible hum beneath his skin. August 16, 1985. The day dawned with an almost aggressive clarity, a blindingly bright sun already climbing high, foretelling another classic, sweltering Iowa summer day. The Millers arrived early, their trusty Ford station wagon finding its usual spot in the sprawling, dusty parking lot near the grandstand. Kevin, a whirlwind of energy, was dressed in his preferred acid-wash denim shorts, a hallmark of the era, and a vividly colored t-shirt, its bright hues almost vibrating with his barely contained excitement. Clutched tightly in his small, sweaty hand was a crisp $20 bill, his annual fare allowance, meticulously saved from mowing lawns and helping neighbors with chores. "Stay close, Kev," Sarah reminded him, her voice tinged with the usual maternal concern, her hand briefly, reassuringly, squeezing his shoulder. "We'll meet by the Pioneer Hall at 5, okay?" "Don't forget," David added, already casting a wary eye over the steadily growing throngs of fairgoers. Kevin, his eyes wide and sparkling, barely registered their words. His mind was already miles away, already halfway to the pulsating heart of the Midway, drawn by the irresistible siren call of flashing lights, the rhythmic thump of distant bass, and the promise of untold adventures. He was a moth to the flame, and the fair was his inferno. The initial hours were a joyous blur of sweet indulgence and stomach-lurching thrills. Kevin soared twice on the towering Ferris wheel, feeling an exhilarating sense of dominion over the world as Des Moines sprawled beneath him, a miniature landscape of homes and businesses. He tried his luck at the ring toss, his youthful optimism rewarded with a small, slightly misshapen stuffed animal, a lopsided panda he instantly christened Lucky, clutching it proudly. He reconvened with his parents for a midday refuel greasy, perfectly salted corn dogs and icy-cold lemonade, the quintessential fair sustenance. He recounted his morning exploits with breathless, animated enthusiasm, his words tumbling over each other. "Can I go back to the Midway just for a bit?" he pleaded, his gaze already drifting towards the distant, flashing lights. "Just one more ride, the Gravitron." Sarah, wiping a smear of mustard from his cheek, offered a familiar caution. "Just don't wander off, honey. We'll be at the livestock pavilion, checking out the prize hogs." Kevin, with a quick, disarming grin, nodded in agreement, a promise easily made in the intoxicating haze of the fair. And then he was gone again, absorbed by the endlessly undulating current of the pulsating crowd, a small red t-shirt swallowed by a sea of faces. 5 o'clock arrived, and then 5:15, 5:30. Sarah and David stood faithfully by the Pioneer Hall, the late afternoon sun beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and pink. Their initial smiles, born of anticipation, slowly, imperceptibly, began to waver, then fade. A tight, cold knot of unease started to twist in Sarah's stomach, a premonition she desperately tried to dismiss. "He's probably just lost track of time, honey," David offered, his voice attempting a reassurance he clearly didn't feel. They made their way back to the Midway, a slow, agonizing trek, their voices calling Kevin's name, growing increasingly strained, thin and reedy against the relentless thrum of the fair's background noise. They meticulously checked the ride lines, their eyes scanning every face, every child. They questioned the bored teenagers manning the game booths, the tired vendors at the food stalls. Nothing. As dusk deepened, the carnival lights, once symbols of joy, began to glow with an eerie, almost menacing intensity, painting the faces of the crowds in unnatural, distorted hues, casting long, unsettling shadows that danced and stretched with every passing moment. The air, once filled with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy, now seemed to carry a faint, metallic taste of fear. Panic, cold and sharp, an icy shard of dread, truly began to take hold. They approached a state trooper, Officer Jim Peterson, his crisp blue uniform a momentary, reassuring anchor amidst the escalating chaos. The officer, sensing the raw terror in Sarah's eyes, listened with an almost paternal patience, then, with a practiced efficiency, began making calls over his crackling radio. Within the hour, the joyous, carefree atmosphere of the fair began a chilling transformation. It morphed into a frantic, highly organized, yet utterly desperate search. Fairground staff, uniformed security personnel, and then a growing legion of volunteers, drawn by the urgent loudspeaker announcements, joined the desperate quest. Loudspeakers, once used for ride announcements, now crackled with Kevin's description, a haunting, repetitive cadence. "Attention all fairgoers, 12-year-old boy, approximately 5 feet tall, brown hair, wearing a red t-shirt and acid-washed denim shorts. If seen, please report immediately to fairground security or the nearest uniformed officer." The announcement, repeated every 15 minutes, became a chilling, unforgettable mantra, a stark, agonizing counterpoint to the distant, oblivious laughter and music. The vast, sprawling fairgrounds, once a symbol of joy, now felt like a predatory, indifferent maze. Sarah sat slumped on a cold metal park bench, her body shaking uncontrollably, her mind racing through every possible, impossible scenario. David paced relentlessly, his eyes darting through the fading light, each passing stranger, each fleeting glimpse of a young boy, igniting a momentary, torturous spark of recognition that swiftly died. The initial, fragile hope that he was simply lost, perhaps engrossed in a game or a show, quickly gave way to a gnawing, visceral dread. As the fairgrounds slowly, reluctantly emptied, the last of the revelers heading home, the ensuing silence was not comforting, but deafening, punctuated only by the distant, mournful hum of machinery and the somber, hushed voices of the search parties, their flashlights cutting swathes through the deepening gloom. They remained all night, huddled in the temporary police command center, a makeshift office filled with the smell of stale coffee and unspoken anxieties. They answered the same excruciating questions repeatedly. What did he look like? What was he wearing? Did he have any enemies? Were there any unusual incidents? The answers felt inadequate, flimsy, utterly meaningless against the monumental, terrifying void that had violently ripped open in their lives. The dawn brought no comfort, only the stark, inescapable reality of an empty seat at the breakfast table. The next morning, the devastating story of Kevin Miller's disappearance consumed the local news landscape. WHO-TV, KCCI-TV, and the Des Moines Register plastered the heartbreaking details across their headlines and broadcasts. Detective Reynolds, a seasoned veteran of the Des Moines Police Department, a man whose weary eyes held the weight of countless past tragedies, but whose spirit remained relentlessly persistent, took charge of the unfolding nightmare. He knew, with a chilling certainty born of experience, how swiftly these cases, lacking immediate leads, could turn tragically cold. Initial theories, whispered among investigators and concerned citizens, spanned the gamut from a simple, if unlikely, runaway scenario to a tragic accident swallowed by the overwhelming chaos of the crowded fair. But as the agonizing days bled into a week, and then into a month, the more sinister, gut-wrenching possibility loomed ever larger, casting an unbearable shadow over the entire community: abduction. The unspoken fear, a cold hand gripping everyone's heart, was that a predator had been lurking, hidden in plain sight, amidst the laughter and lights. The investigation that followed was exhaustive, meticulously detailed, yet ultimately cruelly fruitless. Every single fair employee, from the ticket takers to the ride operators to the overnight maintenance crew, was subjected to rigorous questioning. Every vendor booth was revisited, its proprietor re-interviewed, their alibis scrutinized. Hundreds, then thousands of tips flooded the police station's phone lines, each one a fleeting glimmer of hope, a potential breakthrough, only to be swiftly extinguished as leads dissolved into dead ends or mere speculation. Composite sketches of potential suspects, painstakingly rendered based on vague, often contradictory descriptions from bewildered fairgoers, circulated widely, pinned to notice boards and displayed on local news segments. Flyers bearing Kevin's bright, smiling face, a face frozen in time, were plastered on every lamppost, every storefront window, every community bulletin board from the burgeoning suburbs of Ankeny to the tree-lined streets of West Des Moines. The Millers' cherished home, once a sanctuary of suburban normalcy, transformed into a makeshift command center of despair, the telephone ringing incessantly with well-meaning but ultimately unhelpful calls, each ring a fresh jab of pain. The psychological toll on Sarah and David was immeasurable, a wound that deepened with each passing day. Sarah, once a woman brimming with an infectious vibrancy, dwindled into a shadow of her former self, perpetually haunted by the ghosts of what-ifs and if-onlys. Sleep became a cruel luxury, dreams a landscape of torment. David, typically the stoic anchor of the family, retreated further into himself, channeling his raw, inarticulate grief into an almost obsessive, desperate quest for answers. He spent countless evenings poring over meticulously detailed maps of the fairgrounds, tracing and retracing every possible path Kevin might have taken, convinced, irrationally, that he had overlooked some vital, undeniable clue. Their lives, once so intricately interwoven with Kevin's presence, now felt like two separate, broken strands, incapable of being rejoined. The community, initially galvanized by sympathy and a shared sense of outrage, rallied around them, offering casseroles, prayers, and words of comfort. But as weeks bled into months and months into agonizing years, the collective memory, as it inevitably does, began its slow, inexorable fade, replaced by new headlines, new local concerns, new tragedies. For the Millers, however, the silence was a constant, screaming presence. Detective Reynolds, despite the mounting pressure of other cases and the dwindling resources allocated to a cold file, never truly relinquished his grip on Kevin Miller's disappearance. Kevin's now bulging file remained a constant, heavy presence on the corner of his cluttered desk, a silent accusation, a testament to an unresolved mystery. He meticulously reread every faded witness statement, re-examined every grainy photograph, searched for a new angle, a forgotten detail, a subtle inconsistency. The baffling absence of a body, or any single concrete piece of evidence, no ransom notes, no credible, verifiable sightings, no abandoned clothes, no forensic trace, was the most frustrating, soul-crushing aspect. It was as if Kevin had simply dissolved into thin air, a small boy inexplicably swallowed by the overwhelming anonymity of a bustling summer fair. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been consulted, their vast resources and expertise brought to bear, but even their advanced techniques and far-reaching networks found no clear path, no break in the suffocating, impenetrable silence that surrounded the case. It was a phantom limb of a case, its ache ever present. The years accumulated, marked by a melancholic procession of milestones that only amplified their loss. Kevin's 13th birthday, then his high school graduation year, the year he would have turned 18, a young man on the cusp of adulthood. Each year, with a ritualistic, heartbreaking precision, Sarah would bake a modest cake, light a single flickering candle, and place it on Kevin's untouched desk in his perfectly preserved room, a shrine to a vanished past. David would make his solitary pilgrimage to Sailorville Lake, casting his fishing line into the placid waters, a silent communion with the ghost of simpler, happier days. The vibrant, often turbulent 1980s receded into memory, giving way to the more technologically aware, yet still pre-internet 1990s. The world outside transformed, but Kevin's case remained stubbornly frozen in time, a tragic relic of a sweltering August afternoon in 1985. The missing posters, once ubiquitous, faded and peeled from lampposts, eventually removed entirely. The hopeful tips, once a torrent, dwindled to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Kevin Miller, once a living, breathing, laughing boy, became another name on the ever-growing, sorrowful list of the missing. 15 years. A span long enough to see a child grow into an adult, a generation pass. By the year 2000, Des Moines had visibly transformed. The downtown skyline proudly boasted new, gleaming buildings. The internet, still in its relative infancy for most households, was already reshaping the very fabric of communication and commerce, connecting the world in ways unimaginable in '85. The pace of life felt faster, more interconnected, more urgent. But for Sarah and David, this forward march of time had only served to deepen the chasm of their grief, solidifying Kevin's absence into an immutable, aching reality. Sarah, her once bright eyes now perpetually shadowed, found a fragile solace in a local support group for parents of missing children, a quiet, grim sisterhood forged in the crucible of shared, unbearable pain. David, his once dark hair now heavily streaked with iron gray, still kept a faded, dog-eared photograph of Kevin on his nightstand, the boy's joyful, freckled face a permanent, almost unbearable, fixture in their quiet, haunted home, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Detective Reynolds, a career winding down, nearing his well-deserved but emotionally taxing retirement, was still haunted by the labyrinth of unanswered questions surrounding the Miller case. It gnawed at him, a splinter under the skin of his conscience. Then, in the blossoming spring of 2000, the phone rang, not for the Millers, whose line had long since ceased to be a conduit of hope, but for Detective Reynolds. A tip dormant for 15 years, almost forgotten, resurfaced. It emerged from the meticulous, often tedious process of a routine cold case review, a standard procedure for older, unsolved disappearances. The tip was a notation from a former Carnival worker, a drifter named Earl Denton, who had been briefly questioned in 1985. His initial alibi had seemed robust enough then, corroborated by another transient worker who had since moved on. But that corroborating worker, a man named Silas C. Jenkins, now deceased, had later, years prior, made a cryptic, unsettling remark to a cellmate during an unrelated prison sentence. A remark that at the time had been dismissed as the rambling of a troubled man. The dedicated cold case team, empowered by new digital databases and cross-referencing capabilities unthinkable in 1985, began to meticulously reconstruct Denton's elusive movements, linking disparate fragments of information. The lead was extraordinarily tenuous, a thread barely visible, yet compelling enough to demand attention. Denton had indeed been working at the Iowa State Fair in 1985, specifically operating the thrilling Gravitron ride, the very ride Kevin had expressed such eagerness to experience. Denton possessed a documented history of petty thefts, a volatile temper known to flare without warning, and a consistent pattern of suddenly disappearing after short, cash-in-hand stints of employment at various fairs across the Midwest. His original alibi for August 16, 1985, claimed he was working a different, smaller fair in rural Illinois, an alibi initially provided and seemingly confirmed by his fellow transient worker, Silas C. Jenkins. Jenkins, however, had met his end in prison in 1993, dying of natural causes. But before his death, in a moment of agitated confession to prison chaplain, Father Michael Connolly, he had obliquely alluded to covering for someone at the Iowa Fair, a small-time carny who got into trouble, a phrase etched in the chaplain's memory. Father Connolly, disturbed by the confession, had dutifully filed an internal report with his diocese, a document that had remained buried deep within the church's sprawling, ancient archives, unlinked to any criminal investigation for years. Until now, it took painstaking weeks of relentless detective work to finally track down Earl Denton. He was eventually located living a life of quiet desperation in a small, dilapidated trailer park nestled on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. He subsisted on a meager existence, piecing together odd jobs, a man virtually invisible to the modern world, meticulously avoiding any digital footprint. Detective Reynolds, now officially retired but operating off the books, driven by an unyielding sense of duty, personally flew down with a new generation of investigators, fresh faces armed with cutting-edge techniques. Denton, a man whose face was etched with the grim lines of decades of a nomadic, desperate existence, showed no initial surprise at their arrival. He was older, far more gaunt than his mugshot suggested, his eyes holding a disturbing, vacant quality, a lifetime of unspoken, festering secrets lurking beneath the surface. When gently but firmly confronted with the newly unearthed details of Jenkins's deathbed confession, something deep within him, a wall built of years of denial and self-preservation, finally began to visibly crack. A flicker of raw, primal fear, then a profound, weary resignation. The facade crumbled. The ensuing confession was chilling in its almost mundane, pathetic banality. Denton admitted he had been heavily under the influence of methamphetamine that sweltering August afternoon, a cheap, potent stimulant that was, tragically, gaining a deadly foothold in the forgotten corners of American society in the mid-'80s. He'd seen Kevin near the Gravitron, a lone, hopeful boy with a crisp $20 bill, looking for one last, exhilarating thrill before meeting his parents. Denton, his judgment warped by the drug, had lured him away with the insidious promise of a free, illicit ride, then to a secluded, overgrown area behind the maintenance sheds, a dark, forgotten corner of the sprawling fairgrounds, typically overlooked by security and fairgoers alike. There, hidden from the festive chaos, a sudden, desperate struggle erupted. It wasn't planned, he insisted, his voice raspy, devoid of true remorse. It was a moment of drug-fueled panic. He hadn't wanted to hurt the boy just to snatch the money to feed his escalating addiction. But Kevin, full of youthful defiance and a terror-fueled surge of adrenaline, fought back fiercely, screaming, his small voice echoing faintly in the secluded space. And Denton, in a fit of drug-addled frenzy, silenced him, a hand clamped over his mouth, a desperate, fatal blow. He buried Kevin hastily and brutally that very night under the cover of darkness just beyond the fairgrounds perimeter. The chosen spot was a newly tilled garden plot at a nearby isolated farmhouse where he was temporarily squatting, a property that had long since been sold and meticulously redeveloped into a sprawling, modern suburban subdivision, its cheerful, identical homes now standing where farmland once lay. He described the location with disturbing, granular clarity, details that could only be known by someone who had been physically present, who had enacted the horror. The specific type of fencing, the solitary oak tree, the distant barn, the small, almost imperceptible dip in the land. The original, extensive search efforts had, understandably, focused intensely on the immediate fairgrounds, the vast surrounding fields, the winding banks of the Raccoon River, and even the nearby Formal Creek. Never in their wildest, most nightmarish scenarios had they considered a small, private garden plot kilometers away, obscured by a dense, almost impenetrable tree line, beyond the immediate scope of their exhaustive initial sweep. The ground at the farmhouse had indeed shown signs of recent disturbance, noted by the then-owner, but it had been easily explained away as late-season planting, a mundane detail lost in the overwhelming deluge of information. The news, when it finally broke, hit Des Moines like a thunderclap, a seismic shockwave of raw, unvarnished grief and outrage. After 15 agonizing years of deafening silence, of whispered rumors and dashed hopes, the truth, brutal, stark, and utterly devastating, finally emerged from the earth. Police and forensic teams descended swiftly upon the quiet, unsuspecting suburban development. Georadar equipment hummed, excavation teams worked with somber, painstaking precision for days, meticulously turning manicured lawns and pristine flower beds into muddy, archaeological pits. And there, beneath the very foundations of a seemingly ordinary, newly built family home, they found the remains of Kevin Miller. A small, heartbreaking skeleton, still clad in fragments of a faded red t-shirt, and nestled beside him, a single, slightly crushed, yet undeniably familiar, deformed stuffed animal, Lucky. The panda still clutching its hopeful, lopsided grin, a silent, heartbreaking witness to the final, horrifying moments of a 12-year-old boy's life. The impact on Sarah and David was beyond the realm of human description. Relief, yes, a profound, almost spiritual release that Kevin was finally found, that the torment of the unknown, the insidious gnawing of perpetual uncertainty, had at long last, mercifully, ended. But it was a relief steeped in an immeasurable ocean of unimaginable grief, a sorrow that threatened to drown them whole. Their boy, gone for so long, had been just a few short miles from them the entire time, buried beneath the cheerful, oblivious facade of new homes, of blooming hydrangeas and children's swing sets. The crushing weight of those 15 years, the fragile hope they had nurtured, the bottomless despair they had endured, the countless torturous scenarios they had conjured in their minds, all now coalesced into a single, horrifying, undeniable reality. Their son hadn't simply vanished, he had been taken, murdered, and discarded with casual brutality. Earl Denton was swiftly arrested and formally charged with murder. His confession, though delayed by a decade and a half, provided the vital, albeit devastating, closure the Miller family had so desperately, agonizingly sought. He was subsequently sentenced to life in prison, a desolate, ignominious end for a man who, in a moment of drug-fueled depravity, had callously stolen a vibrant future. For Detective Reynolds, it was a profoundly bittersweet victory, a heavy, long unsolved case finally brought to its grim conclusion. Yet the resolution still weighed heavily on his weary soul, a stark, indelible reminder of the inherent fragility of innocence, the insidious nature of evil lurking in plain sight, and the lasting scars it leaves on individuals, families, and an entire community. The case would forever be a part of him, a constant echo in the quiet corners of his mind. Kevin Miller's story remains a somber, cautionary chapter in the rich, yet sometimes tragic, history of Des Moines. A stark reminder of a bright summer day, filled with laughter and promise, that irrevocably spiraled into an eternal, suffocating night. It stands as a profound testament to the enduring, almost superhuman love of parents, the quiet, unyielding persistence of dedicated law enforcement, and the chilling, uncomfortable truth that sometimes the monsters aren't confined to the dark shadows beneath the bed or to the pages of a macabre storybook. They are instead just beyond the flashing lights of the Ferris wheel, cloaked in the deceptive, ordinary guise of a carnival worker, waiting, watching. And the places we once considered safe, idyllic, the very bedrock of our community, can in fact hold secrets far darker and more horrifying than we could ever conceive, buried beneath the very ground we walk upon, hidden for decades. His memory serves as a silent, eternal vigil.